Good morning, everybody. Thank you for watching on this Thursday morning. It's April 11th, the weather update here. It's been a busy 12, 18 hours here with I think what will go down as a historic tornado outbreak. In many ways, it's still ongoing here this morning. I don't have the valid radar up for portions of the Mid-South, but I will in just a moment. Yesterday evening, we saw a prolific supercellular tornado outbreak push through eastern Arkansas. We had tornado warnings at one point lining all the way from Wisconsin through southeastern Illinois into portions of Indiana, down through the Boot Heel, Missouri, western Kentucky. I'm just going to name almost every state down the Mississippi River. At one point, we had tornado warnings in, I believe, portions of Louisiana, trying over into at least severe thunderstorm warnings in portions of northeast Texas, although there may have been a tornado warning. It's hard to keep track. At one point, I think we had 30 tornado warnings active at one time across the continental U.S., which I don't know if that's a record. I can imagine it's certainly pretty close. And unfortunately, a number of damage reports have come in over the last 18 hours. Still kind of reports coming in from the overnight when most of us were sleeping between midnight and 4 a.m. here. I'm recording this video. You just saw the radar update as the latest image there. Recording this video about 6 a.m. and still seeing storms move through Tennessee here. A number of them warned for tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, and otherwise. So again, similar to yesterday, it's not often that in the morning we're talking about severe weather. We're usually building up to that in the videos, but this storm system is an exception in many different ways. I'm playing the radar loop of yesterday evening, and it's spectacular meteorologically. I'm going to slow this down and back it up a little bit so I can show you what I'm looking at. But I'll take you back to yesterday afternoon. Try to get the timestamp here. We're about at lunchtime here, just after lunch, around 1 p.m. And we had this line of somewhat severe storms moving out of Arkansas, pushing east. If you look to the top of the screen, you can see all the way up into Illinois. A lot of these severe thunderstorm warnings, some of the ones here in southern southeastern Missouri had tornado warnings and were threats for producing tornadoes if they weren't already. But it was really kind of getting into the later afternoon that we saw storms starting to bubble up out ahead of that line. You can see in western Tennessee, northern Mississippi, and these had that kind of look to them, that kind of kidney bean or that kind of hook echo shape early on that we look for, unfortunately, with some of these tornado outbreaks. And then really it was kind of right after kind of 5, 6 p.m. that we saw a number of these much larger, more substantial supercellular tornadoes develop with a clear hook echo. The tornado warning started to get issued in mass very quickly. At any time, we seemingly had multiple strong tornadoes on the ground at the same time. Saw incredible videos out of northeastern Arkansas of, unfortunately, a tornado emergency in Lake City, Arkansas, a wedge tornado that was moving through there. Saw some incredible pictures. And really into the evening, these storms kind of coalesced into this long line. Again, tornado reports running, the gamut up through the Mississippi River Valley, even into the Indianapolis metro area, where there was a tornado that kind of tracked through the northern suburbs through maybe toward Fishers, Indiana. And then this just continued overnight. I'm going to play this radar loop forward. And see this line of severe thunderstorms, kind of what we call a line echo wave pattern, or loop, LEWP. And you can see what we mean by that. These embedded waves, and at the kind of apex of each of those, we typically see spin up tornadoes. And these can be strong, we say spin up, but they can reach, EF2, EF3 in some cases. And you consider that they're coming through at 2, 3 a.m., and that's going to increase the damage potential just because folks are not as aware. I'll play this forward. These storms continue to move through western Tennessee with concerning kind of looks to them, almost like embedded supercells in the line here. And that continues to be the case this morning, looking at some of these. So again, hoping folks stay safe. It's an incredible radar loop. It wasn't just in the Mid-South. I mean, this stretched all the way back toward Texas. And then we even had tornado warnings up into Wisconsin. I believe some funnel reports associated with those. No kind of definitive tornado reports from those, but it's been an impressive event. I think what's not neat for the folks of eastern Arkansas, but neat meteorologically, I'm going to take you to, this was about 5 p.m. Let's get it all the way to about 5 p.m. here. And I'm going to turn on the tornado warnings here because I mentioned how many of those had been issued. If you go to about 5 p.m. of this event, kind of what we consider kind of the beginning of prime time for any kind of tornado outbreak or severe weather. We did have a tornado warning here in western Tennessee. I'm not sure if this one was particularly concerning at this time. We kind of had a stale warning here in southern Missouri, and then another tornado warning here up in central Illinois. I was yesterday afternoon actually chasing a tornado warning storm up here in Illinois, kind of around this time. But if you look, not a lot of warnings kind of issued out ahead of the system where we eventually saw that tornado outbreak, despite it being 5 p.m. But if I just take you kind of an hour later, I mean, not even an hour later, that's when we quickly ramped up to almost 30 warnings from southern Illinois stretching through southeastern Missouri. And then unfortunately, maybe the kind of bullseye and the ground zero of this outbreak, which was eastern Arkansas, we saw all those supercell tornadoes develop. That continued over the next hour, kind of 6 to 7 p.m., and then thereafter weakening a little bit, at least in terms of just how many reports there were. But overnight, continuing to see these in yellow, those severe thunderstorm warnings, this kind of beige yellow in the background. Those are the watches that have been issued. But at almost any one time, there was at least one tornado warning active overnight, and that actually continues here this morning. And I think what happened here, and this is what I was kind of talking about meteorologically, how we went from 1 or 2 warnings to quickly 30 in just 45 minutes to an hour was something that we call the low-level jet. As meteorologists, if you hear kind of the Storm Prediction Center, their analysis, they're always kind of talking about the low-level jet. And what's happening here is in the afternoon, the sun is heating up the atmosphere. We call this kind of convection. And the sun does its job. It puts insulation down on the ground heats up, the ground starts to warm the lower atmosphere, which then makes that air rise. That's convection, and we get clouds. This can help fuel for thunderstorms. Talking about CAPE, how much instability that thunderstorms have available, and we need the sun to provide that fuel. But one thing that this convection does is it mixes the air and the winds in the lower levels of the atmosphere, and when it mixes them together with this convection, it actually makes the winds at the lowest level, and then the winds about a mile up where this convection is over-circulating, it makes them rather uniform. It kind of keeps them mixed together, so they're not terribly too different. But in the evening, between, let's say, 5 to 6 p.m., when the sun is well down here in the horizon, if not getting close to setting, well, you're not getting good insulation on the ground. The ground starts to cool, and you actually stop this mixing effect. And what happens when you have a deep low-pressure system like we did yesterday, positioned across, here, make this valid as of yesterday afternoon. Let's make this valid for about 4 or 5 p.m. When you have a deep low pressure system here across Iowa, you have a lot of wind just above the surface trying to race up to get to that low pressure. We can see that here in the wind field with these wind barbs and the high wind speeds contoured here in red and purple. Well, at about 3 or 4 p.m. Before sunset yesterday, these winds were moving pretty quickly, but it was somewhat mixed with the lower atmosphere. But as we went from 4 or 5 to 6 p.m., you can see how quickly these ramped up in eastern Arkansas. We went from that kind of orange and red color to these deep purple colors, and that extra movement in the lower levels of the atmosphere, that what we call literally decoupling between the surface and the air just above it moving very quickly, is unfortunately a fantastic source of low-level wind shear. And unfortunately, this just picked up overnight. This is now 7 p.m. Central time. You can see this pushing up into Indiana, and we saw tornado reports come through the Indianapolis metro area, western Tennessee, eastern Arkansas, where we really saw this outbreak kick into high gear, unfortunately. So it was really this ramping up. You can see here's 1 p.m., and then we'll take it all the way to 6 p.m. That massive increase in low-level wind shear likely playing a massive role in that tornado outbreak. We saw storms move through the Midwest. I'll take this back. I mentioned take this into southern Wisconsin, had some tornado warnings on some small storms there. The reports are still coming in, so as I pull up the Storm Prediction Center map for yesterday, we're going to see this, unfortunately, increase in coverage for the tornado reports, certainly, and then wind and hail. We'll tally it up at the end and see how it compares to some other outbreaks, but certainly for Arkansas and western Tennessee, it's going to be remembered for a while. If we blow up and look at the radar picture across the U.S. today, the storm system, it's ongoing. It's actually spinning up kind of a new area of low pressure here in North Texas. We have a tornado-warned, pretty large supercell here to keep an eye on east of Abilene, Texas. Again, a line of embedded supercells moving through eastern Tennessee. I would expect these to weaken as we go through the morning hours here, as is often the case, but nonetheless, with warnings still being issued here, we have to keep an eye on these. Unfortunately, just kind of in the last few minutes here as I started recording this video, news that flash flood warnings, not a flood watch, but flash flood warnings have now been issued, for portions of central and southern Tennessee, and those have to be taken, I would say, almost as seriously in terms of life-threatening situations as some of these warnings for severe thunderstorms that we've seen come through. Jump over and look at the all hazards map valid as of this morning. We'll kind of move this more into a what's happening now, what's happening in the future. The large green area that you can see here, we've been talking about these. Those are the flood watches that are active, again, really over the next 48 to 72 hours. So while there is still severe weather to talk about, and that will remain the case, tomorrow on Friday, and then Saturday as well. It's really the flooding threat that has our biggest concern right now. Yesterday it was the tornadoes, the wind, and the hail. That has now transitioned to flood, and that flash flood warning being issued here is really indicative of that. We do have that severe thunderstorm warning that I mentioned. It looks like they just recently dropped the tornado warning as the recording of this video about 6 a.m. Central Time. We had some other areas of the country here not dealing with the severe weather. We do have winter weather advisories posted up into northern portions of New England, the Golden Triangle area of western Montana, and then southern Montana. Actually snow falling here now in some of the northern portions of that, and then today expecting more snowfall in there. We did have winter storm warnings that were posted here for northern Minnesota, Brainerd area over west into the eastern Dakotas. Those have just expired here in the last hour or two. We do have light snow still falling. It's starting to kind of exit out of the area. I'm not sure if that was clear on the radar. You can see, that light snow is starting to exit over Lake Superior here, but you can see that snow now pushing in to northern Montana. Other areas we're watching, we have frost advisories out for the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and Napa and Sonoma here in California, and over toward portions of the west coast as well, maybe getting down toward Paso here. It's hard to kind of eye these valleys one off, but temperatures down there kind of approaching 35, 36 degrees Fahrenheit in both those valleys, prompting the frost advisories there. I want to jump over and look quickly and just see if there's any active warnings here. I'm not going to be able to pull that up, but nonetheless, we're seeing that each of these storms have started to kind of get some space on their own. And unfortunately, if you look closely, you can see some of these might be hook echoes here. And not sure if these are warned currently. I would have to take a closer look. But nonetheless, those kind of hook echoes that you can see there southeast of Nashville, southeast of maybe Franklin, Tennessee, always concerning, even at 6 a.m., let alone later in the day. I think the big problem that we have going forward and the big conversation over the next 72 hours is this. You're looking at a satellite product here, which helps us differentiate from different air masses. In purple, we have a more continental kind of polar air mass, and that's positioned here across the northwest. We just mentioned those frost advisories, the snow up here in Minnesota. Again, embedded kind of in more of the purple colors here. In green, you have your more tropical air masses, where if it was in the hurricane season, we'd see those developing from. If it's in the severe weather season, we're seeing that Gulf moisture push in. And the problem that we have now is we position these right next to one another, and we're pushing flow out of the Bermuda High, and we're crashing these into one another on a line extending anywhere from kind of the Panhandle, West Virginia, through the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, kind of all the way to Abilene, where that supercell is kicking off now. It is this battle zone, if you will, that is the biggest concern over the next few days. And to kind of sum it up, this is the problem. This Bermuda High here is very strong, and we have a deep low pressure system here. We just talked about how that was spinning up yesterday in eastern Iowa, helping fuel this tornado outbreak. These two are positioned kind of in a dipole with one another, and this flow coming out of the tropical Atlantic, just pumping moisture right into the stationary front that's positioned, again, anywhere from West Texas all the way up toward that Panhandle, West Virginia. And we have to talk about the flooding threat and then when that might stop. And we still have, a cropped plant across many portions of the country. In the south, getting started quickly, but that plant progress is going to move north quickly here in April when these windows open up. So I want to talk about that kind of through the rest of the video here. We'll touch on a few things at the end in terms of La Nina and where we might go with that. But I want to switch that conversation quickly toward when we might get a planning window, where we're at with some of the drought concerns as well. Before I do that, just kind of the touch on the flood threat one more time here, the excessive rainfall outlook. This is really a flooding product. You can think of it a little bit similar to when we talk about maybe a moderate or a high risk in terms of severe weather. Well, this is a high risk in terms of flooding in portions of eastern Arkansas today, along the Mississippi River, western Tennessee, southwestern Kentucky. I always tell folks these high risks for flooding are as serious and perilous as a high risk for tornadoes, maybe even more so when we kind of accumulate, unfortunately, the fatality statistics of flooding at the end of every year. So take this very seriously if you're in these areas. Take it seriously even if you're in the moderate. These flash flood warnings can really sneak up on people quickly, and these streams and the rivers here in this area have been rising over the last 20 days. This is an area that we've been talking about with a lot of moisture, not just here over the last 24 hours, but over the last kind of 2 weeks too. Tomorrow, that moderate risk shifts a little bit toward the north and the west. You can see more so northeast Texas up into eastern Missouri, including portions of Illinois, and rainfall expected to move into central Illinois, into central Indiana, some areas that we actually needed a bit more moisture here. We're going to get it on kind of the northern end of this flood threat that we're watching, but we'll see more of that tomorrow on Friday. And then unfortunately Saturday, the same area I just mentioned for today, back under the bullseye for the high risk for flooding here. And so these overlapping moderate to high risks, if I just start here, this is today, still kind of overlapping a bit there at eastern Arkansas, back over that same area in the bullseye. And you have a recipe for a lot of rainfall over one area, and the concern's rising pretty quickly here for a high flood threat. So please take any of those warnings and evacuations seriously. We have the latest WPC forecast for 7-day precipitation, much of this again falling in the next 48 to 72 hours across portions of eastern Arkansas, western Tennessee, really kind of where the Ohio River and the confluence of the Mississippi River and the Tennessee River valleys meet. And again, those rivers increasing in levels here recently. Now, this is a 7-day forecast. I want to point out some other areas here. One, portions of West Texas, eastern New Mexico, the source for some of the dust storms that we saw coming through, they're likely to get rain here over the next day or two. In fact, I say rain, it'll likely transition to snow at some point, especially for the upland areas of eastern New Mexico. Some other areas getting precipitation, I mentioned tomorrow, Friday, more of that plume of moisture and that even the kind of moderate to slight risk for flooding pushing north up into central Illinois and central Indiana. Again, anywhere from 2, maybe 2.5 inches of precipitation in areas there. Again, areas that were a little bit dry, we're seeing get some moisture out of this. I think up toward I-80, those amounts decrease pretty quickly. I-80 and north, probably the rain that we're going to see out of this event, we've already gotten over the last 24 hours. Just showed that right now. I'll jump ahead to that. Look at the last 24 hours of precipitation. See some decent amounts here getting up toward an inch in portions of northern Illinois, central Indiana, looking at a bit more, and then snowfall that we saw. Even some decent accumulations here in northern Minnesota, the eastern Dakotas as well. Other areas that we're watching, right, still dry here in eastern New Mexico and West Texas, but expecting this to increase in coverage here as we go into the next day or two. I'll take a look at that in just a second. When I mentioned that the severe threat is not over, it's less so in magnitude than maybe the flooding threat in terms of concern right now. But unfortunately for Arkansas, this week stinks. There's really no other way to put it in terms of weather and weather risk. And we're just kind of hoping and praying people stay safe right now. So another enhanced risk for severe weather today for Arkansas, for a big chunk of the state, the metropolitan areas, and the central portion as well. What we call hatched tornado risk means there is the potential for intense tornadoes here in Arkansas, despite the flooding in the northeast, an associated wind, relatively less wind threat, and a hail threat as well. Now that's today. Tomorrow, and really just kind of a cruel coincidence, again, the same area here of the central portion of the state may be shifted a little bit toward the north and west, up toward the Fayetteville area. But again, that same kind of corridor and that hatched risk for intense tornadoes, potentially less so wind and hail as well. So we'll have to keep an eye, unfortunately, through the end of the week for Arkansas. And it's not a joke. On Saturday as well, an enhanced risk for severe storms over the southeastern portion of the state and Louisiana and the lower Mississippi River Valley as well. This low pressure system is kind of kicking up here in Texas, is going to be making its way over very slowly, keeping Arkansas on the bullseye here. I want to jump over and show you soil moisture. So we talked about kind of the drought and the plant. I want to get into this a little bit more. We've seen improvements in the soil moisture here in what I'll call maybe the central Corn Belt, Iowa, portions of central Illinois, northern Illinois, portions of central Indiana as well. This is valid as this morning here in terms of root zone soil moistures across the Midwest. We've seen improvements here. Now, this map didn't look like this a few days ago, where a lot of the dryness that we had seen earlier in winter had built back in here. With some of the recent rains, what we got yesterday, what we're likely to get, at least in central Illinois and central Indiana over the next 24 hours, will reduce this even further. The concerns here for that kind of overwinter drought are waning. We still see deeper, maybe 20 inches down in the soil. I went out a week or two ago and tested this to see if I could find it, and I did find that dryness further down here, but increasingly so with some of these more prolific rainfall events. We're going to work that away, I think, and that was the forecast kind of going into April, the early April period, and it's coming to fruition here. Where we're still concerned, we have these pockets of dryness here in the Carolinas. Expected to get rain here through the end of the week, but not a substantial amount. Still have pockets of dryness here in portions of the southeast, particularly Florida. Then kind of the main concern here in the southern plains and then the Dakotas. Watching these two areas in the central and southern plains over into West Texas, eastern New Mexico, for dryness here, trying to expand or strengthen in the same area later in the year. So we're going to be watching that closely. We're obviously likely to get rain here. We just talked, if I go back to the let's go back to the forecast for precipitation here, the WPC If we look in the high plains, southern high plains, eastern New Mexico, West Texas, looking at anywhere from maybe a half an inch up to an inch and a half here. That's the official forecast here from the WPC for Amarillo down toward Lubbock, maybe even a little bit more than that. Again, I'm pretty reliably looking at half an inch, and then some of these areas are likely going to get up near an inch of rainfall. It's not going to be completely drought busting, but we'll take it here in spring as we start the new season. Look over the last 30 days of precipitation just as a departure from normal. It kind of highlights those same areas of concern where we're not seeing a highlight is here over the Corn Belt. So it makes sense that drought risk and the soil moistures are improving there. At least say that again, the soil moistures are improving, the drought risk is lessening. Obviously, Arkansas, any dryness here is no longer a concern. Unfortunately, they're breaking that in the worst way, which is a 3 or 4 day consecutive severe weather event. But you can see even here in the southeast Florida, lingering dryness concerns. We're going to have to watch these areas as we get into the growing season. Any kind of lingering areas, especially getting through the spring, quote-unquote, predictability window when our subseasonal to seasonal forecasting isn't as reliable. We have to watch what's happening now. And what's happening now is these pockets of dryness here in the east and the southeast. What's less of a question, of course, is the rainfall deficits that we've seen here in the southern high plains and portions of the southern plains in Oklahoma and Kansas as well. Rain coming here over the next 48 hours. It's not going to be drought busting, and then keeping an eye on some areas here in the northern Dakotas, which had poor snowfall this year. We just had a little bit of snowfall event here in northern Minnesota, but a little bit further west, watching some areas of dryness here. If I take this forecast from the ECMWF forward, this is looking at the precipitation forecast. I'm going to make this valid here, 7 a.m. Thursday at the recording of this video. And you can see those line of storms that we were just talking about moving through the Mid-South. We can see, mention that supercell in portions of northern Texas. So go through the day 1 p.m. on Thursday, and then now 7 p.m. on Thursday. Remember that area of enhanced risk for potentially tornadoes in southern Arkansas. Watching that pick up here, at least from the ECMWF, but more rainfall, unfortunately, overtraining the same area here in western Tennessee, western Kentucky. If I take it to 1 a.m., this is now early Friday morning. Again, the same area here. I can't rule out some embedded severe weather here, but unfortunately, the bigger threat is going to be the heavy rains. Take it to 7 a.m. Friday, that low pressure system's kind of park here across central Texas, starting to wrap some rain up finally into West Texas, into western Oklahoma. Light at times, but hopefully persistent enough in through Friday afternoon now. You can see some of this trying to get into eastern New Mexico in the form of light showers. And then remember that tornado threat, that severe threat inching a little bit northwest on Friday. You can see that here in some of these higher returns from the ECMWF. Let's take this forecast here if I can get it to play one more. 7 p.m., same areas here, and then coverage increasing in some of the showers here in eastern New Mexico. You can see the snowfall switch over here in northeast New Mexico. Showers still continuing. Now we're all the way 1 a.m. Saturday morning, and this rain has pushed all the way up into portions of the central Corn Belt. I mentioned that's why we're looking at potentially 2 more inches of rain, even in addition on what we just got over the last 24 hours in portions of central Indiana and Illinois. We'll see how far north this gets up toward I-80. So going through 7 a.m. Saturday, and then finally, we'll take this to afternoon on Saturday. Again, just kind of a broken record. The same area here over Arkansas. I can see in the afternoon potential severe weather in Louisiana, portions of central and eastern Arkansas, maybe even over into Mississippi. Just extrapolating that we do have a low pressure system here and plenty of moisture. We'll see if the details kind of come together and we see more significant severe weather event ramp up. Nonetheless, what we have less questions about is the flooding, which is just going to, it's been raining in almost every slide here in this portion of northeastern Arkansas, western Tennessee, western Kentucky, the Boot Heel, Missouri, southern Illinois, even stretching over into portions of southern Indiana. You can see the snow now on the backside Saturday afternoon and evening for West Texas, where we might switch over. Again, I think at this point we'll take the precipitation. And then finally, Sunday morning, we can start to see the system exiting toward the east. Sunday afternoon, likely a weaker thunderstorm threat, if any. We'll keep an eye on this as it goes through the southeast. Trying to get into the Carolinas as we go through Monday afternoon now, looking at a chance for precipitation for some same areas here, right? We just mentioned for drought concern. Not as much, not as substantial, but we'll take it as we get in through Monday evening. And then finally, officially by Tuesday, I can say we're kind of rid of the system here. And that begins a stretch of drier weather Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. We've seen this, hence I talked about this yesterday, of a potential storm system trying to kick through the Midwest. This could spin up and linger at times. It doesn't look like a substantial rainfall maker, but it does kind of park here over the Appalachians where it could bring more significant precipitation into portions of the Carolinas, the dryness that we talked about there. But this is all the way now 7 p.m. Friday April 11th. That is, well over a week away at this point. So hard to pin down the details in the system. What's important here is likely looking at something of a weak system pushing through the Midwest into the east as we go through the work week next week. Now, as we get through the storm system here, I'm taking the temperatures out quickly here. These are the minimum temperatures forecast from the National Weather Service. To take us to Sunday, April 6th, on the backside of the system, can really see temperatures coming down 20 degrees in western Minnesota, all the way down into the mid-20s in portions of the southern plains, west Kansas, northern Texas. So I take this into Monday morning, seeing that freeze overspread much of the Midwest now. 32 degrees through portions of central Illinois and Indiana, 31 degrees western Iowa, or I should say Ohio. And then again, keeping an eye on how far south we get some of the freezing line. I think by Tuesday that starts to push into the mid-south, and looking at something closer to a hard freeze now for a lot of the I states here on Tuesday morning. So this is going to be a concern, right? Again, planting windows, we're kind of waiting on those. To take it into Wednesday morning, again, some of these freezes getting into the mid-south here. We'll have to keep an eye on these closely. But I think by Thursday, these freezes pushing more so toward the east. We don't have the forecast out that far. We do have it from the ECMWF, though. If I make it, let's make it valid. Here's this morning. This is 7 a.m. See that frost concern in portions of California, the Willamette Valley, not down to freezing levels, at least from the ECMWF here, close enough to warrant those frost advisories. I take this forecast quickly. We won't rehash all the rain, the events of the end of the week here, but to take this into 7 a.m. Monday morning, you can see flirting with some freezes here over the Ozarks. That freeze line stretching into portions of the Midwest, starting to sneak into the eastern Corn Belt here. Let's take this into Tuesday a.m. And again, into the mid-south goes that freezing line down into portions of Arkansas, Nashville down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, central Illinois and Indiana down toward the mid-20s. This is hard freeze territory, western Illinois, Des Moines, up in portions of southern Minnesota, certainly well below that freezing line now at this point. Tuesday, continuing Wednesday morning, potentially that freezing line, again, still lingering portions of the mid-south near Nashville, but that warmth starting to push in. The biggest question I have now is, do we get enough of this warmth after the dryness of next week to start opening up planting windows? It's not clear, at least right now, the east seem to be lingering some of those overnight cold temperatures in portions of the east. Now, not getting down to freezing in a lot of these locations, but daytime highs are only reaching 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Is that going to be enough for soil moisture and temperature to recover enough to get field work done? That kind of remains the question I have. Now, if we look at the GFS, I'm going to take the GFS out too. Let's make it valid as a Thursday, April 10th. Again, you can see those cold temperatures lingering in the Midwest, warming up quickly here in the Central Plains, in the Western Corn Belt, and the Northern Corn Belt on Thursday. That continues Friday, and it starts to push more so into Minnesota, into Iowa, Wisconsin, Missouri now, Indiana, getting up towards 60 degrees Fahrenheit Friday afternoon. Take this into Saturday. We're well out in the forecast here. We do have some cold lingering, but even by now, we're getting out, not next week, but the week after, well beyond kind of the scope of confidence for the forecast, but at least a warmer signal there from the GFS, which happens to be drier. What we're seeing in the trough ridge pattern here, we've been talking about this just yesterday, is that as we get into this weekend, seeing this upper level ridge out west, I'll take this into Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday next week. The reason we're seeing some of the cold linger is that ridge out west reinvigorates, reintensifies here across the western U.S., bringing warm temperatures to the west. If I take this forecast forward, this is what we're watching, that potential for that ridge to push east. Now we're seeing this cutoff low here. We mentioned that potential in the ECMWF for this to spin here over the Carolinas. We're seeing that same thing here in the trough. But if this ridge continues to push east, that would increase warm weather across portions of the central U.S. and then eventually the eastern U.S. after a stretch of dry weather, at least safe for portions of the Carolinas here. And I'll pick Fishers, Indiana. Unfortunately, they had a tornado overnight, and so just kind of picking them out as a kind of gesture of hoping things go better for them here today. But if we look out into next week on the forecast, this takes us through April 6th, 7th, 8th, right through the middle of this. You can see 4-inch soil temperatures dropping below 50 degrees Fahrenheit in this forecast here from the ECMWF, but picking up next week, at the end of next week, Friday and Saturday, and then at this point, even during the daytime, getting back over 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, soil moistures, it's hard to see here, but those will be decreasing finally as we start to warm up these temperatures with a lack of precipitation here over the central and eastern Corn Belt. This goes for kind of a proxy for portions of the western Corn Belt as well, as we warm up next week quickly in portions of the central United States. ECMWF AIFS, I just showed you the ECMWF. I'm going to see how their forecast varies. We see that ridge intensify out west. This is 7 p.m. April 11th. And take this into Saturday and Sunday. You can see that ridge starting to push east, maybe a little system here coming through the upper Midwest. and then going actually back toward cold temperatures in that following week with that ridge sticking out west. So I think the big question now is, do we actually get a significant persistent warmth and dry weather over portions of the central and eastern U.S.? Because this pattern here advertised from the ECMWF would likely keep us dry, but on the cooler side. There isn't a great signal kind of going out through the end of the month. I think Eric's been mentioning this as well. We'll be talking about it as we kind of go through the weekend here, both tomorrow in the video update, and then we'll have a new seasonal forecast after the weekend on Monday. I think we'll have a better insight into where this pattern is going by then. Right now, we're not getting a great signal from the MJO. There's some changes in flux with La Nina I'll mention here in a second. Typically, March and April, the MJO is cranking. It can be a fantastic resource for some forecasting, but right now it's not playing its cards. It's kind of in null space here. It hasn't even been able to kind of really show its hand in terms of getting well out into phase 8 and then into 1, or phase 7 and then into phase 8. It's just kind of parked here, and right now it's not giving us really kind of a great signal in the long range. The big story next week is drier temperatures and this quiet period after the severe weather and the flooding that's going on this week. I think that's good news that we see this kind of dry area here over the flooding and the severe risks and the cleanup that's going to be ongoing next week over these areas here of Arkansas. Cooler temperatures, obviously at times early in the week, likely warming up later in the week. This is the 10-day forecast, so it's including what we're seeing over the next 48 hours. But even if I take this forecast from the ECMWF AIFS, which has done a decent job this spring in the long range, all the way to day 8 to 14, this takes us through the 11th of April to the 17th. We don't see strong signal for precipitation here. So this kind of week on, week off that we were expecting, maybe the week off looking at like a week and a half off here, potentially. We'll see where this forecast goes. Like I said, not a very strong signal in either direction here. The 14-day precipitation anomalies, again, this includes the next 3 days. So we kind of have to delete this from the forecast. And if we do, it is still dry with some portions here over the upper Midwest and New England, getting more precipitation. We'll see about the Carolinas. I just mentioned those. If we're looking for a signal from the GFS, again, that big swath over the Ohio Valley we've talked, that's already baked in. But the 8 to 14-day forecast, it's not. And just very little precipitation signal below the Canadian border here. If I go all the way out to 14 days, again, delete this from your brain. We are dry across much of the country here. Now, the weeklies from the ECMWF, I've already just stretched it out here. We knew we'd be dry here next week. Now we're waiting for this activity to pick up again, and we see this. This is all the way out to the kind of third to last week of April now. And we do see increased precipitation, potentially severe weather, potentially some warmth here, but this is now April 20th and beyond. So we might be waiting. Again, we'll see. We'll see where the models end up. I think we'll have a better picture next Monday, but it might be less of a week on, week off, and more of a week and a half off stretch here. And we'll be watching those temperatures to see if it's going to open up a bigger planting window. The problem here is, kind of as we know, as we switch warmer, likely getting a better moisture feed out of the Gulf of Mexico and likely going to return some more decent or significant rainfall chances. So by the end of next week, I mentioned that we're likely getting warmer. Well, if that comes more wholesale across the country, that means we're starting to get that Bermuda high going again. Potentially that weekend or that early next week could be talking about precipitation chances picking up again. We'll keep you updated on all of that. I did want to mention here that we've been talking about La Nina weakening very quickly. Just in the last kind of week or two, La Nina's had a bit of a resurgence here in the Pacific. Not too significant. This is not an uncommon kind of pattern as these things weaken in that way. But nonetheless, La Nina weakening a bit here. If we look at the Haag-Muller diagrams, this is looking at easterly versus westerly winds over the central Pacific. Up is back in time, down is out into the forecast. I was going to say south, but below the black line here. What we've seen over the last, this is the area I'm watching on the graph, so the middle of the Pacific, the central Pacific. Over the last kind of 4 to 6 weeks, we've seen, if anything, westerly wind dominating at times in the central and eastern Pacific. And this has allowed that kind of eastern El Nino look to it develop at times, but in the last week or so have seen more easterly trade wind bursts here over the central Pacific, allowing La Nina to have a little bit of last burst of life here. But if you look in the forecast, those are likely to stop here over the next week, and just kind of a mixed bag here with no strong signal in the MJO here as we go forward. But La Nina continues to weaken despite this recent resurgence. That's the forecast going forward. If we look at the latest forecast from the IRI Institute, this out of Columbia, and no strong signal in either direction that we'll definitely be going into an El Nino, or we'll definitely be sinking back into a La Nina as we go through the end of this year. Likely remaining in ENSO neutral as we go through the growing season, with this kind of background having weakened out of a La Nina backdrop, which increases drought concerns, again, for portions of the central U.S., which is why the Climate Prediction Center has circled an area here across the southern and central plains for increased drought development as we go into the growing season. We have to watch that persistent dryness here across the upper Midwest, and I mentioned those areas that we're watching here in the southeast. At least for now, those drought concerns, the overwintered subsoil, those concerns have been reduced here across the Corn Belt. If we have drought later in the year, it's either going to be expanding here, or it's going to be something more of a flash drought, which we'll be keeping an eye on. I'll end it here today. I want to update the latest all hazards map because, again, this is it's been changing rapidly. I mentioned here they're not on this map. They're being covered up by some of the tornado watches and the severe thunderstorm warnings. We do have flash flood warnings that have been issued now, as some of this sub-severe rain has just been parked over portions of central Tennessee. Please take the flood warning seriously over the next kind of 24 to 48 hours here in this area here. These can be very much can be as life-threatening as any tornado warning that might be issued for your area. Thanks for watching here today. Eric will talk with you all tomorrow on Friday morning. Stay safe, and I'll see you all next week.